Welcome to the Reading with Purpose and Priority. All the reading you ever do from this point forth should have a purpose. It's the purpose that directly relates to your big goal. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't just read for pleasure or read because you're interested in the topic, but you really should try to at least have one or two books going that really directly relate to your big goal. And don't worry, if you have no idea what your purpose is in life yet, you will figure it out over time. Reading will surely help you do that. No one else can bring you to that point. No one else can help you figure out what your purpose is. Your journey teaches you that, but reading helps push you along the way. So that is one thing that is the amazing thing about reading, right? And the important thing is that you're consciously thinking about pursuing it, right? You're taking the action to pursue it. Even if you don't know your purpose, you can at least work towards your big goal, because your big goal is something tangible. It's something reachable. A purpose is not really tangible. You cannot really hold that thing in your hand, right? So that's the difference. That is one of the big differences between your big goal and your purpose. So that's why I pick your big goal as the driving force in this course. It's because you can actually attain it. So this lesson is very important in whatever life situation you're experiencing right now or working towards, including being a fantastic parent or a husband or a wife. If you have kids, this is very important to listen to. And even if you don't, it's still important. So this lesson is one of the most important lessons for your lifelong learning journey and should be one you remember very well. You've also got to think about your own priorities, your personal priorities plus your work priorities. You have different priorities in your life. I find that people who say that they get bored while reading usually do not have high priorities towards like whatever it is that they're working towards, They don't know exactly what they're working towards. That's why they get bored. By setting a priority to accomplish a particular task, you will have no problem with reading. Even the driest book. I'll repeat that again because, even if it is the driest book, if it is something that's helping you reach your big goal, then why not read it, Plow through it, read 5, 10, 15 pages a day of it. And although it may be difficult, although it may be dry, you are at least working towards something. That's the important thing to look at. So I've always had the thought in my mind that all knowledge is worth having, which I read this in a fantasy book. This quote is from a fantasy book. Can you believe it? It was back in 2012 when I read this, and the book is called Kushal's Dart. 3 years. This was 3 years before I started reading nonfiction books regularly. In a way, this is absolutely true when it comes to having an open mind about a broad range of topics. And when you're first starting out on your learning journey, as it was for me, but as I've honed my reading skills and my business skills and my relationship skills, every single skill in my life I've honed, I realized that when it comes to building a healthier and wealthier life, having a broad approach to learning anything and everything that comes your way isn't necessarily the most efficient way of improving. That doesn't mean that you can't have a broad interest. It just means that when you're working towards something, you need to be very specific about that something. about your big goal. Instead, I've learned that when you have a purpose for learning and set it at a high priority, you can create anything such as building an online course, owning a boutique, or dealing with an emotional problem like anxiety. Reading about your specific need to solve your problem or create a business is much, much more important than having general knowledge. It's okay to learn from general knowledge or knowledge outside your field of interest that you might be able to use in the future. You should only spend about 20% or less of your learning time on general knowledge versus 80% of your time on specialized knowledge. Doing this will allow you to keep things interesting. By learning new knowledge outside your field, you will for sure not get bored. Plus, knowledge from outside your field may even enhance what you're actually focusing on. But at the end of the day, the most important type of knowledge you can have is the kind that you can apply immediately. This is a lesson that has taken me a while to figure out during my lifelong learning journey. And many others may have felt the same way. Maybe you do too. Reading has a major purpose, and it is a very active activity. So when you read something, you should read it with a specific purpose in mind. Because this concept of reading with purpose is different for every person, I'll give you 4 questions you can ask yourself before deciding and while reading a book. Number 1, what concepts does this book have that will help me get closer to achieving my big goal? Number 2, how do I know the author is credible? 3, what do other credible people say about this book in reviews and videos and what may be it? Number 4, what practical takeaways do I expect to get from the book? You must notice how I say credible people. The people writing the reviews should write in an educated way and give valid reasons and examples to support their reasonings behind why they like or dislike a book. Those are the type of people you are searching for. If the author or reviewer's reasons aren't backed up or are flawed in some way, then it's better to stay away or use it as a bouncing board to read a better or more credible book. You can find all sorts of different reviews from thousands of people on Goodreads and Amazon, which are my 2 favorite places to research books. But of course, you're not going to be spending thousands of hours reading these reviews. So we need to pick and choose, right? I also recommend that when reading these reviews, don't just look at the 5-star reviews. Look at the whole spectrum of ratings and reviews. Read at least 3 credible reviews for each star rating, or more if you want to. That means you'll be reading maybe 15 reviews, some of which will be pretty short and others which will be very long. In that case, you may speed read or maybe skim the review rather than reading word for word. The point of this is to gauge whether the book is worth your time. It shouldn't take you more than 15 minutes to do this. As for seeing whether the author is credible, I highly recommend doing some research about the author's background, or even asking the author directly if you can. More specifically, see what experiences the author has. Has he or she had practical experience, or is he or she a journalist? The reason I ask this is because people with practical experience in the field of the book's topic are much more likely to produce a book well worth reading. Journalists take the idea of the book, interview people with experience in that topic's field, then write about it. This doesn't mean that the book won't be useful. It just means that it depends on whether the journalist came up with good answers or asked the right questions to the people who know. Okay? Journalists usually have not experienced it firsthand. The writing may be very good, but that's because writing is what journalists are good at. So if they were to write a book about writing, then maybe it's worth checking that book out, right? I love using the perfect example of an author with practical experience, James Clear, Atomic Habits, and an author who is a journalist, Charles Duhigg, The Power of Habit. Let's start with The Power of Habit. Don't get me wrong, it's a fantastic book which explains how habits are formed and what they are, but lacks practical advice on how to start good habits and stop bad ones. It attempts to do so by giving you a simple formula by telling you to notice what clues you start your habit with, right? What your routine and habit is and how you feel rewarded by it. It then proceeds to say that you can change your habits by changing the routine, keeping the cues the same, but changing the routine and keeping the reward the same, right? That's the main practical advice of the book. Of course, there's also keystone habits, which are very practical as well, but they don't really explain how to achieve it. Now, look at Atomic Habits, which not only explains what a habit is and takes off where the Power of Habit leaves off, but also gives several practical formulas like the one I mentioned in the productivity module about habit stacking and temptation bundling. And that's just one practical tip out of the whole book. There are several more. So if you haven't read Atomic Habits, I highly recommend reading it. The way I see it, journalistic writing tends to be a little bit vague when it comes to actually applying the takeaways in your life. And practical writing tends to be, well, practical, of course. Whatever book you end up choosing in the future, make sure it aligns with your big goal in some way, even if it's in a small way. It's okay if it's from a journalist, especially if it's about a topic that is not usually practical like history, but realize that the book may not be the most practical one if it's about a topic like habits. If you become more purposeful with your reading and you prioritize what you read every day, then you will find that your reading and productivity will improve. Now, I hope this lesson has brought a whole lot of great insights that you can actually apply in your life, and you can be more purposeful and prioritize your reading. So now that we're done with this lesson, move on to the next one.